Okay, hello everyone. My name is Joseph Knoebel, and my talk is on iterating with higher order functions. Um, so this is my table of contents, and what we're going to discuss is we're going to first try and answer three questions. What is iteration? What is a higher order function? And what exactly is a JSX element? And then we're going to begin to discuss the limitations of JSX, how we can overcome its limitations, and then we're going to look at an example of code that we've done before and how we can make it better. So let's look at what iteration is. So iteration is, in the simplest terms, is any way of repeating a process. We have tons of examples, especially those that are built in as array functions. We have the dot map, the for each, index of, and we've also learned about all kinds of different data structures and algorithms to improve the repetition of processes. We have binary search trees, tries, queues. The list goes on, pun intended. And of course, we also have while loops and for loops. Okay, so now let's think about what is a higher order function. It's actually very simple. It's any function that fulfills one of two things or both. It's a function that takes a function in as a property, or it could be a function that returns another function, much like factory functions or event handlers in our JSX components. So now let's look at what is a JSX element. We've all have a lot of experience with JSX elements as we've been learning React, but we've never really thought about what exactly is going on. We know it looks a lot like HTML. We know that if we render it to the DOM, it produces the results we want. But in actuality, all of these JSX components are just a call to a create element in our React API. So each create element has three different parts. It has this my component part, and then it has a properties object, and it also takes in all of the children as its third component. And you can see here when we name the component, that's actually a property of that the create element is taking. And then we also have our props that we put in here. And then that is the second. And then the third is the children that are inside of that JSX component. So really, whenever you write code that looks like this, it's just telling JavaScript through the Babel compiler to make something that looks like that. And now that we know that, what can we do to sort of improve and expand upon our limitations of JSX? JSX elements are really powerful. Like, it makes writing and code so much more legible and easier to use, but it prevents us from doing things like directly accessing array values or object key values. And a lot of our forms of iteration that we've done to solve other problems in the past really relies us on the ability to manipulate objects and manipulate arrays. And also, we like to use while loops or for loops and a lot of other different types of data structures that rely on us to do more than just creating DOM elements. So let's look at how we can overcome it. It's actually quite simple, and it's through using the higher order functions that we talked about earlier. We can create a function. And we'll call it our higher order component that just takes in an object, and then you can create a new component by calling a value on that object. And you just return that component. And and then you just cast you just call the original higher order component, but maybe you add a property that takes that object that you want. And another thing that we already do that we don't think about that uses higher are these like on-click events or on-key press events that are really powerful, and they allow us to do really cool and interesting things with our websites. So this is something that we've definitely already been doing, and this in a very simple way we've also been doing. But like now that we understand how it works, we can extrapolate on that and sort of take advantage of it further. So kind of like a common thing that we've done a bunch of times already with arrays is we've used this .map function, this .map method, and we've created lists. And in most cases when we're creating these lists, we just put it into a component that takes an array, and that component, the larger component handles all of this mapping. But if we understand how higher order functions work, we can actually just create another dumb component that can do that for us. And now our code looks a lot cleaner and it's a lot more modular, and we can take advantage of this in other places in our application. Yeah, and so now I want to talk about some final thoughts and how we can actually do things that are way more powerful than just creating a list. By iterating through JSX, we have so many tools at our disposal. Now we can use our for each functions, we can use our mapper functions, we can use while loops and for loops to create new unique components based off of various inputs that we put into it. I hope that some of you guys have noticed one application of this, and I would like to look at some sample code of how these techniques can be used. So here we have this presenter main component, and what it's actually doing is it has all of these different objects that just have text or some HTML as and it's also got this presenter object here that has different references to different kinds of components. And in the code here, what it's doing is when you click next, it's running this presenter, and it's taking in the slide content for us. And then when it takes in the slide content and it determines what kind of object it needs to make, it either makes a header slide that renders very differently, or a code slide where a slide takes in some code as one of the objects, or it even has the end slide, which you guys haven't seen yet, or a picture slide. So it dynamically handles the different kinds of slide data that you might want to create. So I hope that this kind of makes you think a little bit differently about JSX and the kinds of ways you can create dynamic solutions rather than continuing to use mostly static solutions with the JSX. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope everyone either learned something or thought of things a little differently of something they might have already known.